video, we're going to be working on another board and the top of our Warlord Titan.
It's tabletop time!
I'm Dave.
I'm Jen.
I'm Murray.
Warlord Titan!
3, that's time for me. 3, that's time for me.
So there was nothing unusual about that intro at all, and we should just dive straight into the project. Now, I believe I suggested taking it inside at this point, because these sorts of weather conditions you can't really spray paint in.
So it was my first time doing the streaking grime on these pieces, and I was using a very similar method to what Dave had used before. Going in with 2 different colours of enamel, this copper colour and this bright yellow colour, layering each on top of the other.
Now, we've had a lot of comments that I've been noting about the airbrushes that we use. So these are small little battery operated compressor airbrushes. They're really good for belting through things that would destroy your higher quality airbrushes that you don't need finesse on. They're single action airbrushes and they're good for crafting projects and things like that. But for us personally, we love to use them for things like streaking grime where we have a 5mm needle and we're not too worried about pushing enamel paints through and potentially making it very hard to clean our higher quality airbrushes. Now on this particular model, I started to think about how long it had been sitting in the sand and I was a little bit more gentle on bringing back that streaking grime. When I used my woolly daubers, I was really making sure to concentrate on these vertical lines to create these nice streaks of rust running down the surface of the model. However, I do think on some of these parts that perhaps we had left them for too long, as the streaking grime was near impossible to remove, but it was stripping all the way back to the undercoat. It's also possible that we forgot to varnish the top of the vehicle before putting on the streaking grime. So always remember that before doing these enamel weathering effects to varnish the model beforehand to protect those original layers of paint. However, being that this will be aged and the panels painted over and chipped over, it won't be a big deal. We continue our use and mastery of the chipping medium, spreading it all over the model and allowing it to dry for half an hour ready for that chipping.
Okay, so this Titan is going to be the most buried. This is the sheared top half of a Legio Mortis Warlord Titan, and I'm going to bury it. So that means foam carving pretty much a big hole. I almost want it to come up to the roof of the Titan. I'm going to grab the foam cutter and there's hair in my face. It's wild. We're outside and the weather is not great, and let's just do it. It is absolute workstations, I guess. We're well underway, and I am working on the big Legio Mortis Titan right now, just getting all the panels done. And most of this is going to be buried underground, so I'm not taking too much time on them, but there is so much to do. We're starting to get stressed. ARC is this Saturday. We have to do 2 more Titans from scratch, and they haven't even arrived yet. Yeah, so they were out of stock when we first ordered them, and then we reordered them, and postage is not being our friend right now. So we're 2 Reavers down, 4 days to go. So this one is going to be crazy to the wire. Let's hope we can get it done, but at least the journey of this felled Warlord Titan from Legio Mortis can come to life. Enough talking to camera and more painting time. Jen's hard at work.
Yay!
Now, this was the first time I could start to think about how Legio Mortis would be represented on the battlefield. Now, Legio Mortis in the canon are painted in a nice red and black paint scheme. As I like to avoid painting with black, I went for the heavy charcoal paint from Vallejo. Now, another thing to note is, unlike the Deus Tempestus, we weren't preserving the trim. Legio Mortis have a gold trim, so we'll be needing to paint over this later, so I could be a little bit more rough with the airbrushing and get that done a bit quicker. Once the red layer was down, that's a gory red, we came in with a brighter red and focused on the central areas and highlight areas just to give a bit of nice depth on these larger panels. Now, a really great thing about chipping medium is that it makes everything super forgivable. I decided to name this Warlord the Sanguinus Rex, which basically means the Blood Lord, and incredibly quickly sketched out a sort of realistic heart as well as some blood drops. I was pretty rough with these as I knew I'd be chipping them back. And then for the other panel, I decided to start to show the influence of the binaric scrap code, the chaosy influence that was starting to seep heavily into the Dark Mechanicus at this time. These arcane sigils and strange scratchy runes would have been daubed over this titan as a sign of allegiance to the currently unknown dark gods. With all of these little painting elements done, it was time to weather them up using the chipping medium and a sharp pointy stick. This allowed me to scratch off any areas of my previous quick freehand that I wasn't happy with, and in some areas I took away most of it, leaving only an impression. I'm also conscious on this part of the model that it's going to be heavily buried and covered in weathering pigments, so there's no point in spending a huge amount of time at this step making things look perfect because they're going to be destroyed and then covered in sands later. One area I was quite happy with though was the random panel of just scratched chaos runes. It's funny how individually they're not that impressive, but when you get an entire wall of this strange runic text, it does look pretty cool.
Gives me kind of like Dead Space vibes or like Matrix. It's really nice.
Just focusing on one thick metallic coat on all of those trim elements. Now in its colossal clash, the Deus Tempestus actually fells 2 Warlord Titans. One of them is detonated quite handily and the other one is sheared in half. So this one, in my mind, is the Titan that the Deus Tempestus managed to shear in half, basically separating the upper torso from the lower torso and collapsing and having it deeply buried in the sand. Now if we're going with the theme of the Mechanicus excavating these Titans, this corrupt and evil Legio Mortis Titan has been left to languish, unvenerated and undug up due to its traitorous nature.
So I've positioned some pieces. Come have a look and let me get your vibe. So this is kind of, this suddenly looks a lot cooler than it did when I had the little pieces. So I'm thinking this will be fairly intact. We're going to sculpt model so you can move models over it fairly comfortably, but kind of bring the level up so that the bits can shine.
Yeah.
But I realized I've got all these arm pieces, so I was thinking that that's where the Gatling blaster is, so I can sort of bury this arm like half in and have this broken off and put some cables between them, and then we've got then people go, oh, that's where the gun came from, this guy.
Yeah, it isn't just random isolated blaster in the middle of nowhere.
Is this the vibe?
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay, cool.
I think that's cool.
Buried Warlord, let's do it. It's glue time.
It really came down to play space as being the biggest consideration. I knew that once we got sand onto this, we needed to be able to deploy models here. And while it's cool to have some terrain and some line of sight blocking and really important for games, it's also important that a corner of the board that will often be part of a deployment zone has plenty of space for models to be placed. So to achieve this, what I did is actually place out the armor panels that had been painted as if they'd sort of broken off their mountings when the Warlord had collapsed into the ground. This allowed me to spread them out and make them a lot more flat than they are usually presented on the model. And I even broke one of the central panels on the right hand side of the Warlord to help further accentuate this.
In order to make the Warlord Titan's body more stable, we went ahead and just packed in the empty spaces with some foam.
The Sculpt-it-mold needs to dry to set, so if we tried to fill this whole thing with Sculpt-it or Sculpt-it-mold, it would A, take forever to set if it ever did, and would also be very heavy. So packing this thing out with foam once we placed the Titan was definitely the right idea. One other thing that was added is we also had the arm pieces of the Warlord Titan, and I deliberately threw these down onto the ground close to where the laser trench was. By adding these elements jutting out of the ground, you can really see the story of how that weapon, which is most definitely not a laser, ended up smashed into the ground near to this Warlord. The broken arm pieces connect the two sections of the board, and it's cool. I don't know how to finish that sentence.
When I'm gonna make a mess, I like to be protected, so I use the new Tabletop Time aprons. This one is a prototype, and we call it Belly Top Time, but the real one is up here. If you'd like some good merch, like correctly located Tabletop Time aprons, go on the web store. It's www.itstabletoptime.com. And it's a pretty sweet place. We also have our Gatecrash minis, like the ones up display up there. And there's also beautiful posters of our roleplay campaigns, and anything you grab is a big support to the channel. So thank you very much. Now, if you wouldn't mind whip panning over there, that'd be great.
We are ready to cover this board in Sculpt-it-mold. We've patched the hole up with a bit of foam just to make sure it's all got something to stick to. So it's time to get out my favorite material.
So it's time to put on our favorite medium onto this board, and I really do enjoy using Sculpt-it-mold. There's just something really tactile and fun about it.
I'm pretty sure Sculpt-it-mold is a brand name though, and we don't even use Sculpt-it-mold. We actually use Sculpt-it.
Oh, there you go. Well, I will now call it Sculpt-it from now on. But either way, putting the Sculpt-it on was a lot of fun. As David mentioned before, something we wanted to include was sort of these slopes that led up to the armor panels, ensuring that people's models wouldn't fall all over the place.
We tackled this approach in two passes. First of all, tacking in the Warlord and also filling out those gaps underneath where the armor panels would be. And then the second pass was to place the armor panels and use the Sculpt-it to actually fix them onto the table and also create those gentle slopes that Jen had talked about.
When it comes to putting the Sculpt-it on these boards, something else that's really important is filling any of the gaps along the edges of the board. We needed to make sure everything matched up nice and neatly when the boards are put together.
Now the left side of the model I kept at a gentle slope. This is something where you can definitely put infantry models here, but anything else it starts to get a bit more sketchy. For the right hand side is where we really flattened out these panels and we're going to bury them more significantly. And this area you should be right to deploy pretty much anything.
When it was time for our boards to dry, we ended up throwing them outside to get the best of the Australian sun. However, I think our sun is a little too strong and ended up taking a lot of the color pigment out of the boards. They ended up this really weird skin color pink sort of mess. It was really interesting that it did this, but the boards were dry nevertheless. We decided to put some pigmented sand and some texture paints on top to bring back that color it had taken out.
We're losing steam.
Oh no.
I think this is a bit more watery.
So to bring back some of that color, we use a PVA mix and also some sands.
I don't like sand.
Two different sands mixed with differing concentrations of red and brown pigments. By shaking these onto the board in random patterns, we create a really nice blend and bring a lot of that Martian red richness back to the table. And after this PVA is dried, we also give another coat of PVA on the top just to seal it in. Now the finishing touches on these boards are pretty simple. I come in with a Fugan Orange and an airbrush, putting the wash in any areas of the Sculpt-it that are still visible and don't look Martian orangey enough. I also do the same thing with Agrax Earthshade to bring a bit of darkness and depth to some of the recessed or shadowed areas of the board. Once this is done, we use Vallejo's Dwarf Flesh to dry brush everything, covering all of the sand evenly. The way this blends between the two different colored sand mixes and also the still present and visible Sculpt-it really makes the board feel cohesive and brings it together.
Looking back on this project, I wish we hadn't buried it in so much sand, but doing the dry brush on top did bring it back a lot, which was good.
Now with the weathering pigments on this board, I am more worried about what looks cool than what's historically accurate. We've already determined this is a fantasy game and we got to go with rule of cool. And one of the ways I did this was actually adding a bunch of charcoal black to the exhausts of the Warlord. Now of course, this would have been covered up centuries ago. It's ridiculous to even consider it would be there, but it's kind of what the eyes expect. So when you place it on the board, these dark pigments in the engine and this soot-like belching of black carbon out the back of the Warlord, it just looks right. With the carbon done, we just add 3 different oxide pigments from Vallejo's range in the red and orange spectrum.
It's crazy to think how much these pigments actually do to this board. Before, this was a weird skin colored looking thing, and now it actually looks like a piece of Mars.
Final step is airbrushing on a pigment setter to make sure all of those pigments seal on, and then at the very end we throw on a nice matte varnish just to protect everything. With that done, we can have a look at this spicy model. Holy mackerel! Holy titanerol! It's our patrons! Thank you very much, patrons.
Patreon allows us to create awesome videos like this one and this Titan series, so again, thank you so much for all of this support. If you'd like to consider joining, all of the links are down in the description below.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the journey that was the top of the Fallen Mortis Warlord Titan. Jen,
say something random.
Yeah, it was a really fun project, but we have a long way to go. There are a couple more videos we still have on this Titan board, and we hope that you're excited for them.
And for those who've been keeping score at home, Jen's Sister Knight conversion video did get over 100,000 views, so thank you for that, because that means I get to make my awesome Dark Mechanicus Knight conversion. So if you weren't fully burnt out on giant 40k robots, there's more coming. So like and subscribe to follow us on that journey and to watch the rest of this Titan table get built. We'll see ya in the next video. That's Jazz's outro. You okay?
Yeah, I mean, it might be
See ya in the next video.
copyright. Just bleep that out. Just don't.
For more fun with art and creativity.
No.